Could you tell me, what was your reaction when you first saw the film Control?
I'm trying to think where I first saw it. I saw it at the corner house in town, and I remember going in with great trepidation, really, because it's not really a bit of history that I kind of roll over in my head over and over again, you know, because it was quite a painful period, obviously, because of what happened to Ian. And you kind of think that some things are better left alone, really. So it was with some trepidation I went in to see it, but I was also, on the other hand, felt that I could trust Anton Corbijn, who directed it, because we'd worked with him, obviously, in photo sessions, and he actually did Joy Division's first major photo session, which, you know, we knew him, we were in safe hands, so that kind of eased it a little bit. And it was very emotional, you know, obviously, because of what happened, but I liked the film tremendously. I thought it was great, and I thought it was very accurate, and I just thought it was great at the end of it, so I was really pleased. I think I said to Anton, there's nothing I don't like about that film.
And on a kind of personal level, is it kind of a bit weird when you see an actor being you? Do you kind of did you get a little bit of focus on that?
No, not really, no. No, because you're kind of used to being in the public eye from being a performer, so seeing yourself up there, someone portraying you, it didn't really faze me at all, no.
And in terms of the kind of the character of Ian,
yeah,
do you think that's one of the things that is accurately portrayed in the film?
I'll say, yeah. I think it's incredibly... Sam Riley's portrayal of Ian is incredibly strong. In fact, I don't know how they got it to be so accurate, because there's not that much footage about of Joy Division. You know, there's not that many interviews with Ian, I don't think, and there's very little footage, Joy Division footage. In fact, I think that's one of the great things about the film, is that perhaps for you and me and people who know Joy Division, we've got a good picture of what they were like, or what we were like, you know. But for the younger generation of people, there's not really that much footage, you know. There's no Top of the Pops footage that gets shown on Top of the Pops 2 or anything to go back on, so they're a bit of a mystery, really. And I think the great thing about the film is that they've done it so accurately and the songs are portrayed so well that it brings the group back to life again and shows you how great the music was and how great the performances were, because it's such an accurate rendition, you know. I think that's a really good thing about the film.
One of the things also about the film, it kind of reminds everyone how young you all were at the time. I mean, looking back, there was a lot of stuff for sort of young people to have to deal with. Yeah,
well, it didn't seem it at the time, because I think I was 21. I was thinking, at the time, I remember distinctly thinking, this is too old to be in a group. What am I doing joining a group at my age, you know? I know that seems banal and ridiculous, you know. I do distinctly remember that feeling, you know. So how wrong I was, yeah. No, we were very young. I mean, a lot of people, when I look back at the music of Joy Division, you think, well, how could someone so young, or a group of people so young, make music that was that heavy and deep, you know? Because, you know, here I am, I'm 28 now. And I don't make music as heavy and deep as I did when I was at that age, you know. So it's a bit of a puzzle, really. But thinking about it as I've done over the years, I think part of it was a reaction to what was being played on the radio every day in those days. Of course, XFM wasn't around then. And it was kind of really straight music, you know. It was horrible. It was like The Sweet and, you know, Jonathan King and Neil Sedaka, and we were hearing it on Radio 1 and just going, this sucks. And no one's listening to this. I didn't know anyone that listened to that kind of music. And, you know, there was at the school that I went to, which was Salford Grammar School, there's a big culture of music there. And, you know, I suppose kids today go in and talk about the latest computer game, or, you know, are you going on your Xbox tonight? To us, it was music, and we brought records in. Even if we couldn't play them, we just brought them in to show people the sleeves, you know. And there was a big culture of music in the schools, so... So I had that musical culture instilled in me, and it was a reaction against what they were playing on mainstream radio, really. It was a reaction against that, what I was hearing, because I thought it was crap, and all the kids at school thought it was crap. So, well, then where do you get the music you want to hear? Well, you make it yourself, you know, or you buy it in record shops.
Also, I think around that time there was that. There was also kind of a sense of adventure in music, in that there was a kind of almost like intellectual adventure, in the sense that it was through music that you discovered, you know, Andy Warhol or kind of weird foreign films, and the kind of this hidden. It kind of opened up a hidden world for you, didn't it? Music.
Yeah, well, I think that was an important thing in music. There was a sense of lifting the lid off things and finding out for yourself, because you know, like radio and television didn't provide it. They might have hinted at it, but they didn't provide it. And there was a kind of sense of, well, you know, your friend would go out and buy some obscure record in Rare Records in town and go, have you heard this? By a group called the Velvet Underground. All right, where are they from? New York. All right, no, I've never heard of it before. And he'd play it, you know, and then there was a kind of sense of self-discovery, you know. But saying that, I don't think the culture's there for that now in schools, because there's so, you know, 2,000 television channels and every computer game under the sun, and every time you go in a shop you hear music being played. I think to a certain extent it's overplayed now, and there's not that sense of discovery there. I think so anyway, you know. But I mean, another thing is that it was so, going back to the original question, the music was so heavy because I think we'd all had pretty heavy lives, you know, growing up. I did, growing up in Salford. I had quite a difficult time with illness within my family and people dying in the family, and when I was very young, and you know, bad things happening, and I know that Hooky had problems, a few problems. And, you know, we'd had quite a tough, it was quite tough growing up, really, and I suppose we grew up young because of that, right? Grew up early. In a way we did, but in a way the group was our island, so that we didn't have to grow up, we could be eternal adolescents, you know.
So there was a kind of reservoir of maybe sadness or anger that you were also drawing upon in the band then?
Yeah, I mean, definitely for me, you know, I mean, well, without going back into my family history, it was difficult, you know, and also what had a big effect on me was I lived in Salford, and the whole community at one stage was just devastated by the council. The council just bought the area, moved everyone out into high-rise flats, and just broke the community up. So there was the whole community that I'd grown up with till I was 12 years old had just been basically wiped out. So there was a sense of loss there. Plus I had people dying and very ill in my family, and I was getting a personal sense of loss from that. So I was a bit devastated on an emotional level by the time I joined Joy Division. So I guess that's reflected in the music, along with this reaction to Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep and all the stuff that they were playing on the radio. The two combined to make the music of Joy Division very heavy. For me, from my point of view, obviously Ian had his problems, which are documented in the film.
So obviously I've read you talking about how you didn't discuss the lyrics that Ian was singing.
We didn't discuss music. The most we might do is, I remember on 2 occasions, someone brought in a copy of The Idiot or Lust for Life, one of those albums, and someone brought in 7 and 7 Is by Love, and we attempted to play them and couldn't because they were too technically difficult for us. So we went, right, okay, let's play something like that. We really like this. Let's play something like that. That was probably the only time we ever discussed music. The reason being is that we didn't really know what we were doing, and we didn't really know how to do it. But we knew that when we sat down in a room together, it just happened. So if it's happening, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we just knew that if we just sat down in a room, started playing together, these songs would happen. So we didn't have to analyse it. In fact, I think that if we did try and ever analyse what we did, then it just stopped working, and you wouldn't be able to write a song for about a week. So it was like, just leave it alone, just let it happen, let it have its own spontaneous growth, And the same applies for Ian's lyrics, Felt a bit personal. It's like reading someone's letters, listen to Ian's lyrics. I know it sounds bizarre now, but there was no interaction between us. Even on stage, if you do get any old footage of Joy Division and watch them, there's no interaction between the band. We're not smiling and winking at each other like Spandau Ballet used to do. We just ignore each other. And it seems bizarre to me now. There's no eye contact or anything. And that's not because we weren't getting on. We got on really well in those days. It's just the way we were. I mean, Rob, there's one of the famous things that Rob Gretton, when he first met us, was really shocked by he met us at a rehearsal room, and then I'd forgotten to tell the rest of the band that it was coming down. So we were rehearsing away, and then one by one they came over to me and said, "Who's that bloke sat in the corner?" And I was like, forgot to tell you, he wants the manager. So when it sunk in, we went out to the pub, and Rob was really shocked that we didn't buy each other rounds. We just went to the bar and bought each other our own drink. I think that was a Salford thing. And no one bought him a drink. So he said we thought we were trying to freeze him out because no one would buy him a drink, I went, no, we just buy our own drinks. We don't buy rounds. And,
Talking about the live performance, I mean, obviously, Ian was giving whatever, 110, 150% for the live performance. And was it kind of, as a fan and as a punter, it was a bit scary watching that happen. Was it a bit scary being there on stage and seeing that performance unfold?
Yeah, well, sometimes it got more over the top than others. I remember we played at Rafters, and he actually ripped the stage apart. All the stage was made up of plywood boards, and he actually managed to prise them up with his fingernails and ripped them up, and then threw them like boomerangs at the audience. That was scary because he might have chopped someone's head off with it. I think he was a bit upset that night over something. No, we just kind of took it for granted. That was Ian, very quiet and polite in rehearsals, and good fun, good laugh, and sense of humour, good sense of humour. And then in concert, it turned into the wild man of rock. I don't know. It was just manic personality, and he always talked about having a manic element in the music. He was a man of extremes. He always wanted our music to be extreme, so I guess that was his attitude towards performance. But I don't think it was performance. I think he just, from my experience, he just got totally lost, almost hypnotised by the music. In fact, I've seen him hypnotised by the music properly, when he's just you've seen how he dances to the music. I've seen him dance like that and not be able to stop, and we've had to stop him, so I guess it was a form of being hypnotised by the rhythm. It's just a bit like a dervish gets lost in twirling round. Ian was the same. He seemed to go into not a trance. I think that's too heavy a word, but he just totally into the music, but in a strange way, really. I don't know. I can't explain it, but he seemed to just get lost in it completely.
And Debbie in her book talks about how the dance and the seizures almost kind of became somehow related.
Yeah. Well, the dancing started giving him seizures, I remember we supported the Stranglers somewhere in London, and I think we were playing the Atrocity exhibition, and he was dancing away, and we stopped, but he carried on, and eventually just carried on dancing, and eventually just crashed into drums, knocked his drum kit over, and the band had to physically haul him off stage, and he was having a fit, and we had to carry him through the liggers and hangers on all backstage. What's the matter with him, and he'd be writhing, and we'd take him in the dressing room and pin him down and hold him down, stop him hurting himself, and then bang, he'd come out of it, and then he'd just be in tears, really upset that that this had happened to him, which I can understand fully, because he didn't start with it in the group. It came on all of a sudden one night. He didn't have epilepsy when he joined Joy Division. I don't know how far into our career it was, but I would guess to say that I think Joy Division lasted for all of 4 years, and I think it was the 4th year. I think I'm right saying that. Steve would probably know better. He's better at dates than me. And we were just driving back. We did a gig at the Hope and Anchor in London, and it was a bit of a disappointment, really, because not many people turned up. I think four people, and famously a dog, turned up. Ian was, because I was ill. I was really ill with like vomiting and diarrhea in the morning. I didn't want to go, and they dragged me out of bed. But I noticed that Ian was in a worse mood than I was. And this was in the morning, leaving Manchester, and we drove down to London, did this gig, which was pretty crap, drove back up, and just, I think, as we got to Luton, or as we got past Luton, by this time, because we'd been for something to eat after the gig, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, Ian just grabbed my sleeping bag that I had on me. So I was like, give it back, Ian, give it back. Not like that. Give it back, Ian, give it back. Give me that fucking sleeping bag, you fucking twat. So, and we started wrestling over it. So I'd pull it over me, and then he'd turn around, he'd pull it back, and I'd pull it over me, and then he'd pull it back, and he just started making this horrible noise. And then he started lashing out. He was sat in the front, I was sat behind Steve, who was driving, and Rob was sat to the left of me. And I think Hooky was in a van with a gear separate. I'm not sure about that. And he just started lashing out in the car, started punching the windscreen, and just, I think Steve got a clock one in his ear or his cheek or something. And so Steve pulled over on the hard shoulder, and we dragged Ian out of the car and pinned him down, and he obviously had a fit. And that was it. That was the first time. Took him to the hospital in Luton, and they just said, you better go and see your doctor when you get home. Yeah.
And the medication that he was on, it was kind of clearly the doctor was being a bit random and not necessarily...
Well, I remember that suddenly after him seeing the doctor, he had this regime and this like pill box with like 5 different kinds of pills in it. Which seemed quite interesting at first, but after seeing what he did to Ian, I think it was like a bit of a Russian roulette approach from the doctors in those days. I mean, the sad thing was Ian didn't just get a mild form of epilepsy. Epilepsy these days is a pretty controllable illness, I think, but Ian had it very, very severely straight away. And he had this regime of pills. I must take my pills. Don't remind me to take them. And he'd go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I don't know what they were. I know some of them were barbiturates. And it just changed his personality. Not overnight, but, over the space of a few days. And he'd be laughing one minute and weeping the next minute, Well, it didn't close to it, It gave him mood swings, basically. And didn't seem to control his epilepsy. I mean, what seemed to give him epileptic fits was stress, and obviously flashing lights and strong, heavy rhythms. I mean, it wasn't in the ideal job.
When Anik arrived on the scene.
Yeah.
Did which is obviously it's kind of an important part in the film and so on. But did you kind of go oh, this is going to be trouble, or?
I think Rob did. I think Rob kept calling him John Lennon, Yoko Ono, dead funny. And she and Ian got a bit of grief from the rest of the band when we were recording Closer, and she came to stay in a flat. We had this kind of setup in London where we had two flats, right, one on the left, one on the right, and I was sleeping in the lounge, and Ian and Anik were sleeping in one of the bedrooms, and in the other flat, Hooky, Rob and Steve were sleeping, and they used to play practical jokes on Ian all the time, like put cornflakes in his bed, and there was a bit of needle, I felt, that was unnecessary, because like she was a vegetarian and Ian had suddenly become a vegetarian, and he used to, well, he changed, and I don't think this went down too well with the lads. What are you doing, And there was a bit of that I thought was a bit unfair, a bit of taking the piss and, a bit harsh on him, I thought, a bit unnecessary. I mean, it was supposed to be jokey, but it was a little bit malevolent, I thought.
And from what I've sort of read, it seems like his relationship with Anik was kind of quite, almost sort of childlike and sort of a little bit kind of desperate. It's not like a rock star with a groupie.
It was nothing like that. It was nothing like a rock star with a groupie. And I know everyone would say that. Every rock star that's ever got off with a groupie would never. Oh no, it wasn't like that. Wasn't like that. No. I think it. I think it was on an emotional and intellectual level, And if it wasn't, I would tell you. But I think it was quite a tender relationship. Ian was pretty. I don't think he was that physical a guy, He wasn't like a complete filthy bastard like some people in groups are. And he never went with groupies. Not that I know of. He wasn't that kind of guy. He wasn't a flirty guy, and didn't really chase women around, like some other people in bands do.
In the film,
I hear, so I've heard it. And he wasn't that kind of guy. Mm-hmm. So I think it was an emotional and intellectual relationship that he had with her. Yeah.
In the film, he kind of gravitates a little bit towards you, as if there's a kind of a connection there. Was that something that you were aware of at the time?
Oh God, it's hard to remember after all this time. I mean, Ian stayed with me just before he died. He stayed with me for 2 weeks just before he died. And like I say, we stayed in the same flat in London. But I think that he was interested in some of the weird things that I was interested in on that level. I was in the film quite interested in hypnosis, and Ian was, and we, would talk about psychology and things like that on that kind of level where perhaps the others didn't. Maybe Steve did, but I guess we might have had chats on a deeper level that he felt that he could with Rob and Hooky. Maybe he did with Steve, I don't know. But, we used to talk about psychology and hypnotism and history and things like that. And maybe with Rob and Hooky it was more football and birds. Don't know, perhaps. I don't know, But, I mean, he was on, pretty friendly with everyone in the band, Yeah.
And in that sort of final time, I've read Vinnie Riley talking about the situation and saying that when he got the phone call that Ian had died, Vinnie says, "I wasn't surprised."
Mm.
Was that?
No, I was very surprised. Well, even though... See, what happened was he tried to commit suicide once before. I don't know what the trigger was. The first warning signs, I guess, looking back at it, was he turned up at rehearsals one day at the rehearsal room in Cheetham Mill where you came, Dave, and he said, "Look what happened last night." They were late or something. Him and Steve came from Macclesfield, me and Ucky came from Salford, and Steve used to give him a lift down, and we used to practice in Cheetham Mill. Steve used to give him a lift down, and they were always on time, and we were always late, even though we lived near. But Ian and Steve turned up late and went, "Oh, sorry, like something weird happened last night." I was like, what? He said, "Look at this," and he took his shirt off, and he was covered in knife marks, horizontal, on all his arms, quite deep scars. And I said, "Well, what happened?" And I think, you should check this out with Steve, I think he said I was reading the Bible. And I just woke up in the morning. I must have blacked out and woke up in the morning covered in these marks. I don't understand it. I think he was reading the Bible. I'm not sure about that. He stayed up reading. And I guess that was the first warning sign. The next thing is we get a phone call somewhere to say that, I think it's quite a bit later, maybe a couple of months later, that Ian had tried to commit suicide, and we were like, we knew then that he was having terrible difficulties over guilt, over his affair with Anique, and having Debbie as a young wife and a young child, a baby as well, and also his epilepsy was upsetting him. He couldn't do things like he couldn't pick the baby up because he might have a fit, so he couldn't pick his own child up, and it made him feel very guilty, and all these things were going through his head. I mean, he was 20, 22 something, and I think if it happened now, you could deal with it, but at that age, everything was too early for him and too young, So, so we heard that we got the phone call to say Ian's tried to commit suicide. Yeah, what has he done? We knew he was depressed, And he'd taken an overdose of pills, drank half a bottle of whiskey. So, alarm bells went off, and he was in a hospital, I think a psychiatric hospital, I think in Macclesfield. Tony and Rob went to see him, and, everyone was in complete shock, obviously. And a stupid thing happened. We had a gig coming up in Bury, I think it was. And either Rob or Tony... I've got a feeling it might have been Rob, talked him into the best thing to do is don't dwell on it, just carry on as normal. Do you want to do the gig? And Ian like, yeah, let's do it. And we did this gig in Bury, and he had to actually come out of psychiatric hospital to the gig. And he couldn't do the full gig, he was a quivering wreck, really. And he couldn't do full songs. He did like a song and came off, and someone else would have to go on. And eventually it was a huge riot with fisticuffs and bottles flying and people getting their heads cut open and our gear getting trashed and the band fighting the audience, But of course the audience didn't know what was going on with Ian, because no one had made an announcement. Ian's really ill, you'll have to bear with it, lads, or it's, get your money back at the door. So it all kicked off royal. And then there was people coming in the dressing room, like one of the roadies, and his head was cut open, blood down his shirt, people getting rushed off to hospital, and Ian was like, "Oh God, it's all my fault." So he went under again, So we decided that the best thing for him then was to have a quiet time, just stop everything, just have a quiet time. So he actually went to stay with Tony, first of all. Tony was having, shall we say, an argumentative time with one of his wives, or not getting on the best with her. So he went into an environment where he wasn't arguing with Debbie, but Tony was arguing with his wife, and again, it turned out to be a bit stressful. So in the end, he ended up staying at my place, and I was arguing with my wife at the time. But, yeah, everyone was arguing. So I forgot where I was going then with that.
But despite all that, when the call came, you were surprised.
Well, oh yeah. When so he tried to commit suicide. He was really shot, and everyone was like really worried about him, you know. But the whole thing was, oh, it's a cry for help, darling. It's a cry for help, you know. And so I got talking to him when he stayed at mine, and I remember coming back from rehearsals once, and for some reason we went on the bus, and we walked through Peel Green Cemetery, because I lived in Peel Green near Eccles then. And we walked through the cemetery, and I said to him, look, I said, Ian, you know, I thought this was a good chance to talk to him about it. I said, what were you doing, man? I said, this could have been your name on one of these headstones here. And he said, well, the only reason I didn't go through with it was because I didn't have enough of the tablets, and I thought I might give myself brain damage and survive it. So that's why I called for an ambulance, you know. So... And then I just, you know, sat down with him when we got home and just talked to him about it and tried to give him a more positive outlook. And he's the sort of guy that would agree with what he's saying and nod, go, yeah, right, yeah, right, yeah. But he'd have his own agenda, and you wouldn't change that agenda, and I think that's what happened. So when we actually got the call, he stayed with me for 2 weeks, and we used to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning talking about, you know, history and talking about various things, music, you know, play a lot of music, and, you know, as you do. And then we were due to go to America on a Monday, I think it was. The flight was going out, and he actually said in the last week before we went to America, he went, well, I'm going to move out now. I'm going to go and stay with my mum and dad. I think his dad was still alive. So I said, all right, yeah. And he moved in, you know, into his mum's, but we still used to go into Manchester for a game of pool and, you know, a drink. Some pub in Spring Gardens, don't know where it was. And this loony mate that I had, we always used to go out and play pool. And I think it was Friday night, and we were due to go out, you know, for a game, and he phoned up and said, listen, I've decided to go and see Debbie. I'm not going to be able to make it. I just want to sort things out before we go to America. So I said, all right, yeah, fine. He said, well, I'm going to go to Blackpool to see Section 25 tomorrow anyway, so I don't want a late night, you know. And I said, well, just see you at the airport on Monday, you know. I was like, yeah, it's going to be great, innit? Then it's like, he'd gone out, he'd bought all clothes. I know that he bought clothes I saw him he bought new shoes and jeans and stuff to take to America, so. And I went over to Section 25's place, and we spent the day outside because it was a really nice day. And the phone went, and it was Rob, and he just said, Ian's committed suicide. And it didn't sink in. I said, what, he's tried it again? He said, no, he has. So I said, yeah, he's tried it again. He went, no, he's not tried it, he's done it, he's dead. And the whole world just literally, I don't know if it's fainting or what, but the whole room just seemed to turn upside down, and it just hit me like an express train. You know, it was a huge, huge shock. Because it's, well, you just didn't think that, I guess I did think it was a cry for help the first time, you know. And I felt that we'd all done our best to talk him out of it, and that perhaps, because we got America, he was looking at life in a more positive attitude. But he was in a strange frame of mind those last few weeks. It was like he had to make a decision between Debbie and between Anique, you know, and perhaps between the group and a more sedentary lifestyle of maybe doing something else. And it's like he didn't want to make any of those decisions. He was like, he wanted someone to tell him what to do, and he would have done it. You know, if I'd have said, Ian, you want to, you know, get rid of Anique and stay with Debbie, he would have done it. I'm sure if that's what we'd have advised him. But you know, you can't can't do things like that. Obviously, it's got to be a personal decision because he was in a strange frame of mind, and it's like he just wanted someone to tell him what to do, and I've never understood that. Yeah,
looking for a guy.
I think even when we were recording Closer, because we used to stay up late talking, I remember him. He had a feeling. He was telling me that normally that to write the lyrics took 2-3 days or something. He said, but these are just like the songs are writing for themselves. He had a feeling that everything was wrapping itself up, that everything was wrapping up to an ending, you know.
I think the weird thing is how some of that is.
But I think that he was an explosive personality. You know, he was in a fragile frame of mind, coupled with his extremely explosive personality. He wasn't a violent guy by any means, and he was really polite and nice. But his way of dealing with stuff would be to get really angry, and he would get a enormous energy from this anger, and he'd use that energy to deal with whatever the problem was. And that kind of technique just doesn't work with relationships, you know. And I think that was his Achilles heel.
The weird thing is how some of the lyrics kind of predict, in a way, that frame of mind. You know, like even early on, when, like in Digital Waves, you know, feel it closing in, and then, you know, unknown pleasures, I want a guy to come and take me by the hand. Mm-hmm. That potential seems to have been there, and that's kind of the weird thing about it. It's almost what happened validated the songs.
Well, from his lyrics, you would think that these are the writings of a person who's incredibly lost, and but he didn't come across as that, and that's why it came as a surprise. He came across just like the rest of us, you know. He had his moments of deep thought, you know, like we all do, but for the majority of the time, he was a kind of fun, laughy-jokey person, you know, when he didn't have the barbiturates, you know. And he loved the group. He was getting what he wanted. I mean, maybe that was part of the problem, that he didn't expect to get what he wanted, you know. And the group had this enormous charisma, and people just couldn't take their eyes off him on stage, you know. And the group was, you know, in the early days, we couldn't get a gig anywhere, and we had some little tin pot agent in Princess Street somewhere. He'd get us a working man's club in Huddersfield, and the only drawback, lads, is it'll cost you £5 to play there. And we'd do it, you know, just to get the experience, and we'd crash, like we crashed the punk club, The Ranch in Manchester. And we just went in, we just pulled up with a van outside. Everyone grabbed an amp, ran in, found a socket to plug it in, and just played an impromptu gig before the bouncers could stop us, you know. And we'd do anything to play. And so he was really eager and enthusiastic to do it. But I don't know, perhaps the epilepsy changed all that, because it's very difficult having epilepsy, but to have it in such a public way must be pretty embarrassing, you know. And I guess he was thinking, well, how can I get over this one, you know? Maybe he felt that had cut his life off anyway, because it was so extreme, that was stopping him from fulfilling his destiny, you know. Anyway, that had put a giant roadblock had come down on his future with the group, because, you know, he did question it sometimes. How was he going to carry on if he's this ill? I mean, that was a cult group, you know, a burgeoning cult group. And later on, you know, I mean, when New Order, we went to America, we eventually went from playing to like 1,000 people a night, small club gigs, to 25,000 people a night, you know. And you're like, I was thinking, bleeding hell, I never thought it'd end up like this. Like, it's like being a proper rock star, this. And it, you know, it catch you off your balance, so to speak. You'd be like, well, it's showtime, guys. You know, you're suddenly in a different performing sphere, and you just suddenly got different requirements upon you. from the audience and from your record company and from the promotions department and from, you know, meet and greet and all that kind of thing. It's suddenly you're in a different world. Like, I'm not in a small cult group now where I can do ever what the fuck I want to do. And, you know, if, you know, some guy from a record shop comes in who's obnoxious to me, I can just throw him out. You can't do it anymore. It's, you know, I remember New Order's, when we got signed for Warner Brothers and we did our first tour of America, we played in Boston, and we used to play for like 25 minutes and then just go off, not do an encore, because we got bored watching groups after 25 minutes or half an hour or something, you know, and we thought that was normal. And little unbeknown to us, a riot kicked off in the auditorium and people smashed the auditorium up, and none of the roadies came and told us, and the first thing we knew about it was when the police turned up in the dressing room. So the next morning I get a phone call off Mo Austin, who's the president of Warner Brothers, going, "Hey guys, you know, you can't do this over here, you know, what happened, why was he a riot, you know?" I was like, all right, different rules now, you know. And I think that things would have got very tough for Ian. If they were tough then, they would have got really tough, you know. So I don't know if Joy Division had carried on and Ian hadn't committed suicide, I think I would have had a shorter career, amazingly, because I think that it had come to the point where Ian would have been not fit enough to play, or common sense would have overtook to either him or us and gone, look, you can't do this, you know, you're making you increasingly really ill, you know. So, in a strange way, I just think that he wouldn't have been able to carry on, and I think that he would have become a writer. That's what he would have done. He'd have become a writer because he was very, very interested in writing and books. Yeah.
Just finally, when you began in New Order, and I mean, among the songs that you did in the early sets were Ceremony and In a Lonely Place, which were kind of Ian's songs. It must have been a bit mind blowing for you personally to get up on stage. I mean, it was mind blowing enough to be in the audience. I remember like a gig at Comanche Centre, that place on Hattersage Road, quite an early New Order gig. And, you know, you played both those songs, and it was you singing Ian's lyrics.
Yeah, well, we played those songs because I think we wrote them either the week before he died or the week before he died. And we wrote them to cheer him up. It's in a lonely place. Oh, God, great. Well, we just carried on writing. I mean, I think the whole vibe was, let's carry on as normal and don't let him fall into this black hole again. So, you know, creative therapy, we'd write a couple of songs. So we wrote those songs. I don't think we ever played them. I think we just wrote them in the rehearsal room. We had the worst cassette player ever. I remember after Ian dying, we were like, well, at least we've got those two songs. We've never performed them as Joy Division, so we've gone to the effort of writing them. Let's use them. So we had to get this cassette out, which was the only record we had of the songs, and put it through a graphic equaliser and try and decipher Ian's lyrics. You know, they're probably not very accurate, but we felt that they were good songs and they'd be a good... we felt it was a kind of parting gesture. Ian had left us with those two songs to start our next phase in our career, you know. It was very strange. I mean, starting up again, we didn't really know what to do because we weren't expecting this to happen, so it was an enormous shock. And how do you carry on without Ian? You know, it's like how do you carry on? How do you make it work without Ian? And we didn't really know what to do at first, but I don't think there was ever any question that we wouldn't carry on. We just didn't know what to do, who was going to sing. It felt too cold and calculated to get someone else in. I was approached by a couple of people on the street, I remember. And I'd tell the others, and it just felt too calculated and cold. It wasn't the way we did things. It's like you couldn't just replace him with someone else. So what we decided to do was to continue on our journey to America, and we would find out there, in front of a public who'd never seen us and didn't know much about us, find out there who was going to be the singer and what sort of sound our future lay in. So we went over to the States, and we had two things. We had a small East Coast club date tour booked. I think it was about 6 dates or something, 9 dates, something like that. And we had a recording session in Orange, New Jersey, as soon as we got there. And with Martin Hannett, so we did the recording session, but we were staying in Manhattan. So we drive into Manhattan every night and then out to the studio every day, and we recorded Ceremony and In a Lonely Place with Martin. And I think that lasted about 3 days. And then on the last night, we drove back into New York, and all the gear came into New York. And all the gear came into New York in a truck. And Terry Mason, our wonderful roadie, and Twinny had fallen out with each other. They'd had a row with each other, so they weren't talking. So we were parked the truck outside the Iroquois Hotel, which was on West 53rd Street or something in Manhattan. And because they weren't talking to each other, they didn't alarm the truck and didn't disable the truck. So they were supposed to take the distributor coil, the cap, off every night, and they didn't do it because they couldn't agree whose job it was. So we woke up the next morning, and in those days we were pretty poor, so me, Rob and Hooky were sharing a room, separate beds obviously. And I remember Tony was over there, and he came in the room laughing his head off. And he said, wake up, wake up. He said, you'll never guess what's happening. He was like hysterical laughter. I hope it was hysterical laughter. And he went, I said, what? No, what? He said, you've had all your gear stolen. And we were like, oh, shit. We were like, oh, shit, what? I couldn't believe it. It was like the final straw, nearly the straw that broke the camel's back. And so we just told the police. I remember we went into this police station, precinct 13 or something, and this big black cop was there. He had a blaster playing Chic, massive blaster. We're like, excuse me, we're English, we just had $45,000 worth of equipment stolen. And he just went, you wait while the record finishes, man. And he was dancing, and we had to wait while the Chic track finished. And then it turned out that the gear, some of it turned up later. Well, a couple of items turned up. Was Steve's drum kit turned up, a Rogers kit that he had, and they'd caught this. It was the Roving Tribe of Israel, this group that call themselves a Roving Tribe of Israel, and they nicked it all. And it turned up in one of their lockups, but none of my stuff turned up. None of my guitars and amps or anything turned up. So that was a devastating blow to carry on. And then we had to go out and hire and buy, new equipment. So I bought this guitar, and it's not in here, but we could buy everything. But I remember we couldn't get Hooky's 6-string bass, so we hired what we thought was a 6-string bass, and we were doing a gig in that evening. No rehearsal, just hired the gear. This bass turns up. I'm like, I used to tune all the instruments up. He couldn't tune up. I'm like tuning it. I'm like, fucking hell, this bass. I'm tuning it, and the strings are snapping, and the neck's bending out like that. And eventually we got it in tune, but it was so ready to go off. It was like a bomb. It was so tight and tense, And you played a gig, and it was all out of tune, and it sounded crap. Years later, I found out that it wasn't a 6-string bass, and it was a baritone guitar. And you were supposed to tune it like a violin or something, completely different tuning, and it was nearly took someone's head off with a string snapping, and it the whole thing was a debacle, really. And but we tried different things out. Steve sang on some, Hooky sang.